I pulled into my own driveway and sat there with the engine running, staring at the moving truck, parked halfway up my lawn like it belonged there. It didn't belong there. Neither did my son-in-law. But that's the thing about 63 years of living. You learn that the problems that end up costing you the most are never the ones you saw coming. They're the ones that showed up smiling, shook your hand, and called you Dad. His name was Clifton. My daughter Roseanne had married him 4 years ago in a small ceremony at the Botanical Garden outside of Raleigh. I liked him fine then. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, effortlessly, almost too much so. He laughed at my jokes. He helped carry in groceries without being asked. He remembered that I took my coffee black and always had a cup ready when I came downstairs. I remember thinking, my daughter did well. I was wrong about that. My wife, Lorene, passed in the spring of 2021. Pancreatic cancer, 14 weeks from diagnosis to gone. There aren't words for that kind of speed, for watching someone who was just complaining about her tomato plants not getting enough sun suddenly become a woman who can't lift a glass of water. I won't try to describe it here. Some things you carry in a compartment you never open in public. What I will tell you is that after she passed, the house felt different. We'd lived there 31 years. A 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet neighborhood outside of Charlotte. Good bones, as Lorene used to say. She'd painted every room herself over the decades, changed colors with her moods and the seasons. The living room was a deep, warm gold by the time she left. I haven't changed it. For about 8 months, I managed fine on my own. I'm not a helpless man. I cooked simple things, kept the yard up, called my daughter every Sunday. Roseanne lived about 40 minutes away, in a rental house she and Clifton had been in since they got married. They'd been trying to buy something, but the market had gone crazy, and Clifton's work situations was what Roseanne diplomatically called transitional. In plain language, he kept quitting jobs. Not because he was lazy, exactly. He had a good mind for certain things. He'd been in pharmaceutical sales, then logistics management, then something to do with real estate wholesaling that I never fully understood. Each time he left something, he had a reason that sounded reasonable. The market was shifting. The company had integrity issues. He had a better opportunity lined up. The opportunity never quite materialized. In late November of 2021, Roseanne called me on a Sunday and asked if she and Clifton could stay with me for a few months, just until Clifton landed the new position he was interviewing for, just until they could save a deposit on a house. They were 2 months behind on rent, and their landlord wasn't willing to work with them anymore. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She's my daughter. The house had 3 empty bedrooms and a kitchen that hadn't heard 2 people talking over dinner in months. I missed the noise of a family. They moved in on the first Saturday of December. The first few weeks were fine, better than fine, honestly. Having people in the house again helped with things I hadn't admitted were heavy. Roseanne cooked Sunday dinners and left leftovers labeled in the fridge. Clifton fixed the garbage disposal that had been grinding wrong since August. We watched football together on weekends. It felt cautiously like something good. I told myself, this is manageable. Then January came. Small things, first, the way it always is. Clifton started having phone calls in the backyard late in the evenings. Long ones, sometimes an hour, voice low. When I mentioned it to Roseanne, she said he was working on something new, a business venture, and didn't want to jinx it by talking about it too early. Fair enough. I dropped it. Then I noticed things in the house being moved. Not dramatically, not like furniture rearranged. More like my filing cabinet in the den had been opened and not closed all the way. The small lockbox I kept on the top shelf of my closet had been taken down and put back at a slightly different angle. I told myself I was probably misremembering where I'd left things. Grief does that. It loosens your grip on small certainties. But in February, I found something I couldn't explain away. I was going through old paperwork. Insurance documents mostly, and I pulled out the folder where I keep my social security card, passport, and the copy of Lorene's death certificate I'd needed for the estate. Everything was there. But tucked behind my social security card was a small piece of notepad paper with my full name, date of birth, and social security number written out in handwriting that wasn't mine. I stood there in the den for a long time. I told myself there was an explanation. I told myself I might have written it myself and forgotten. I told myself a lot of things in those next few minutes, standing at my own filing cabinet in my own house, because what the alternative actually meant, wasn't something I was ready to sit down with yet. I put the paper in my coat pocket. I didn't say anything to anyone. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay on my side of the bed, the side I've slept on for 31 years, and I stared at the ceiling and thought about who else had access to that filing cabinet. I hadn't locked it. I'd never needed to. It was my house. These were my people, or so I'd believed. I got up at 4 a.m. and went to the kitchen. Made coffee. Sat at the table where Lorene and I used to eat breakfast and read different sections of the same newspaper, passing pages back and forth without talking because we'd been together long enough that the silence was comfortable. I pulled up my credit monitoring app on my phone. I'd signed up for one of those services that alerts you when someone makes an inquiry on your credit. My son-in-law actually recommended it to me about 6 months before he moved in. Said it was good protection these days, especially for older folks who got targeted by scammers. I thought he was being helpful. There were 4 hard inquiries on my credit report since December. 3 of them I didn't recognize. 2 credit card applications. 1 for a personal line of credit. None of them were mine. I sat at that kitchen table until the sun came up. Then I called my attorney. Her name was Beverly Okafor, and she'd been handling my affairs since Lorene passed. Sharp woman, no nonsense, didn't sugarcoat things. I told her what I'd found. The handwritten note, the inquiries on my credit, and she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Don't say anything to him yet. Don't tip your hand. Come in and see me this week." I went in on Thursday. She pulled the full credit report while I was sitting across from her. 3 applications in my name, all made in December and January, all using my correct personal information. 1 card had actually been approved, a store credit card with a $2,500 limit. Beverly asked me if I'd received any new mail I didn't recognize. I thought back. There had been some envelopes I didn't open right away, figured they were promotional mailings. I went home that afternoon and dug through the recycling bin in the garage. I found the card. It had never been activated. Maybe he was waiting for the right moment. Maybe I'd caught it before he could. Either way, it was there, a credit card in my name, sitting in my own recycling bin, in an envelope that had been opened and then tucked under a stack of old newspapers. I photographed everything. Beverly had already called a contact at the local police department she worked with regularly on elder financial abuse cases. She told me to be patient. Don't act yet. We needed to know the full picture. I went home that evening and I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, and I watched Clifton come outside to make another one of his phone calls. He waved at me, smiled. I waved back. I have replayed that moment many times since, that exchange of waves between 2 men, one of whom knew exactly what the other had done. I'd like to say I felt rage. But the truth is, I felt something quieter, a kind of exhaustion with the version of myself that had opened his home and not looked closer. I felt the weight of the handwritten note in my coat pocket, which I'd carried with me every day since finding it. I don't even know why. Maybe so I couldn't talk myself out of what I knew. Over the next 2 weeks, Beverly and her contact built a clearer picture. The credit card was the visible part. Underneath it, they found that Clifton had been operating a small LLC registered in my name. I didn't know, hadn't authorized it, hadn't signed anything. That appeared to be connected to a wholesaling scheme involving property contracts. My name was listed as a managing member, My social security number tied to the entity. I don't know exactly what he planned to do with it. Beverly said the legal exposure for me could have been significant if it had gone further. Liability attached to transactions I knew nothing about. That kind of thing can follow a person for years, especially when you're 63 and trying to protect what you've built. He had used my dead wife's estate paperwork to lift the necessary details. The copy of her death certificate that I'd needed for the county records. My own name and number on documents I thought were safely filed away. He had stood in my kitchen every morning and handed me coffee, and he had done this. I called a locksmith on a Tuesday afternoon while Roseanne was at work, and Clifton had told me he'd be out until evening for an interview. I'd arranged it with Beverly's guidance. We'd already filed the initial report with the police, and there were legal grounds to proceed. This was my house, my name on the deed. No lease agreement had ever been signed because they were family, because I had trusted them, because I thought that meant something different than it apparently did. The locksmith was a quiet older man named Roy who didn't ask too many questions. He changed the front door, the back door, and the side entry in about 90 minutes. I watched him work and I thought about how Lorene would have handled this situation. She'd always had a directness I sometimes lacked, a willingness to call a thing what it was, without apologizing for the naming. I thought about her a lot that afternoon. When Roy packed up his tools and left, I stood in the front hallway of my house. My house, every payment made for 31 years, every wall painted by my wife's hands. And for the first time in months, I felt something that resembled steadiness. Then I went upstairs and I packed their things. Carefully, without damaging anything. 2 suitcases for Roseanne, 1 large bag for Clifton, the things in the guest bathroom, the laptop on the desk in the bedroom. I set everything on the covered front porch, and I went inside and I sat down and I waited. Clifton's car pulled into the driveway at 6:40 p.m. He walked up to the front door, tried his key, and found it didn't work. He tried it again. Then he tried the side door. I watched through the front window, standing back far enough that he couldn't see me clearly. He started knocking, then louder. Then he was slamming both palms flat against the door, shouting my name, shouting that there had to be a mistake, shouting that we needed to talk about this like adults. I opened the window. I told him calmly that there was no mistake, that a police report had been filed, that he should not attempt to force entry into the property, because that would be a separate matter for the officers who already had his name in a case file. I told him his things were on the porch. He went very still. Then he started talking differently, quieter, reasonable, in that particular tone men use when they realize the performance hasn't worked. He said there was an explanation. He said he'd been going to talk to me. He said he'd been trying to do something good for our family, that he'd made mistakes, that he needed a chance. I said, "Clifton, your things are on the porch. Do not damage my property." He stood there for another minute. Then he picked up the suitcase and the bag. He put them in his car. He sat in the driver's seat for a while. I don't know what he was thinking. Then he backed down the driveway and left. Roseanne came home to an empty house. Empty of him, anyway. I was sitting in the living room. She came in the side door I'd unlocked for her, and she stood in the entryway, and she already knew. I could tell by her face. I think some part of her had known for longer than she was willing to say. We talked for a long time that night, long enough that the room got dark and I forgot to turn on the lights, and neither of us noticed until we were just 2 voices in the dim gold room her mother had painted. She cried. I'm not going to pretend it was simple or clean, because it wasn't. She was humiliated and heartbroken and furious in ways that tangled together in the way that only betrayal by someone you loved can tangle. There was grief for what she thought her marriage was. There was shame, even though none of it was her doing. There was anger at him and a little at herself for not seeing sooner. I let her say all of it. Then I told her what Beverly had told me. Roseanne bore no legal liability. She hadn't known. There was documentation supporting that. And whatever happened next in her life, whatever she decided about her marriage, about where she lived, about who she wanted to be, she had a father who wasn't going anywhere. She stayed in the guest room that night. She stayed for 3 months after that, and this time it was different. This time I knew exactly what I had under my roof. The legal process moved the way legal processes do, slowly, then all at once. Clifton was charged with identity theft and fraudulent use of personal financial information, 2 counts each. Beverly kept me informed every step of the way. The LLC was dissolved. The fraudulent credit accounts were disputed and cleared from my record with documentation from the detective assigned to the case. The card he'd never activated was used as evidence. His attorney tried twice to negotiate a plea that would avoid jail time. The prosecutor, a young woman named Nobody, I'll mention here because that's not my story to tell, was not interested in a deal that didn't include restitution and a period of supervised probation at minimum. In the end, Clifton pleaded guilty. He received 18 months probation, mandatory restitution, and a conviction on his record that would follow him into every background check, every job application, every professional license renewal for years to come. I was not at the plea hearing. Beverly was. She called me afterward and told me it was done. I thanked her. I went out to the backyard, to the same porch where Clifton used to make his quiet phone calls, and I sat down and I thought about what I'd thought I had and what I actually had, and how sometimes it takes losing the false version to understand the real one. I had my house. I had my daughter, who filed for divorce 3 weeks after that night, who was now rebuilding her life with a clarity I found quietly remarkable. I had my name, untangled from whatever he'd tried to attach it to. I had my credit score back, 83 points lower than it should have been for 4 months, now restored. I had the gold room, the walls her mother painted. People sometimes ask me, when I tell parts of this story, whether I feel guilty about not seeing it sooner, about being, as they put it, too trusting. I've thought about that. Here's what I've landed on. I didn't fail by trusting my family. I failed by not paying attention to the specific things that stopped feeling right. The paper in the filing cabinet, the inquiries on the credit report, the phone calls in the backyard. I told myself stories to explain each one away because the truth was uncomfortable to hold. The lesson, if there is one, isn't trust nobody. It's simpler than that. Your gut speaks before your brain catches up. When something in your own house starts feeling like a question mark, don't wait for it to turn into a sentence. Don't talk yourself out of what you already know. Lorene would have caught it in the first month. She would have had that direct look she used to give people. Pleasant, entirely unbothered, and she would have said, "Clifton, I need you to help me understand something." And it would have been done. I learned the long way around to a lesson she already knew. That's all right. I'm 63. There's still time to carry it forward.